Part of the odd-toed ungulate lineage, Brontotheres convergently resembled rhinos but were actually much more closely related to horses. And much like the Dinoceratans, they also had some unusual heads, with some species evolving concave foreheads and sexually dimorphic ossicone-like pairs of blunt horns on their noses. Rhinotitan had long skulls with nasal horns. Like other solid-horned Brontotheres, it was sexually dimorphic in horn size. In living mammals, this pattern is found in species that live in groups. Males have the larger horns, and use them in ritualized combats with other males to decide control of territories that offer breeding access to females. Most horned Brontotheres had dish-shaped skulls assumed to be adapted for such combats. Protitanops that lived during the Eocene, in the western United States, especially in Death Valley, in California. It bore a strong resemblance to Megacerops with its knob-shaped horns. However, the position of the horns differed in Protitanops, in that they pointed straight up, rather than more forwards, like in Megacerops. Brontotheres probably became extinct because they could not adapt to drier conditions and more open landscapes of the Oligocene. Despite resembling the rhinoceros, it was larger than any living rhinoceros. The living animal easily approached the size of the African forest elephant, the third largest land animal today. It possessed a blunt Y-shaped horn-like protrusions on its nose up to 45 centimeters in length. The dorsal vertebrae above the shoulders had extra-long spines to support the huge neck muscles needed to carry the heavy skull. The shape of its teeth suggests that it preferred food such as soft stems and leaves, rather than tough vegetation. It may have had fleshy lips and a long tongue for carefully selecting food. The skeleton of an adult male was found with partially healed rib fractures, which supports the theory that males use their horns to fight each other. No creature living in Megacerops time and area except another Megacerops could have inflicted such an injury. The breathing movements prevented the fractures from completely healing. Embolitherium lived in Mongolia during the late Eocene. Standing around 2.5 meters tall at the shoulder, it was one of the largest Brontotheres and also one of the oddest looking. It had a large bony battering ram at the front of its snout, formed from modified nasal bones, and while some reconstructions tend to shrink-wrap this structure as a horn, the fact that the nasal cavity appears to have extended all the way to its tip suggests that it was actually supporting a huge bulbous nose. Since Embolitherium also doesn't seem to have been sexually dimorphic like other Brontotheres, its enormous ridiculous-looking snoot may instead have been a resonating chamber used for sound production and communication. This hypothesis is suggested by the fact that the bony nasal cavity extends to the peak of the ram, thus implying that the nasal chamber was greatly elevated, possibly creating a resonating chamber. The fox-sized Hyracotherium is considered to be the earliest known member of equity before the type species was reclassified as a Palaeothere, a perissodactyl family basal to both horses and Brontotheres. The remaining species are now thought to belong to different genera, such as Eohippus, which had previously been synonymized with Hyracotherium. It had a short face with eye sockets in the middle and a short diastema. Although it had low-crowned teeth, the beginnings of the characteristic horse-like ridges on the molars can be seen. Hyracotherium is believed to have been a browsing herbivore that ate primarily soft leaves as well as some fruits and nuts and plant shoots. Propaleotherium was a small animal, ranging from 30 to 60 centimeters at the shoulder, and weighing just 10 kilograms. It looked similar to small tapirs. It had no hooves, but instead several small nail-like hooflets. The well-preserved mesial fossils showed their herbivory, specifically their preference to eat berries and leaf matter picked up from the forest floor. A 2004 study found it to be an equid instead. When the show was aired, Propaleotherium was assumed to be one of the ancestors of the modern horse, and had been depicted as such. Now, however, it appears that it belonged to a different branch of equids. Paleotherium was a relatively large herbivore for late Eocene Europe. Proportionally longer forelimbs, an elongated neck, and high crowned teeth suggest it is likely to have been a browser, with a diet of soft fruit and leaves taken from low-hanging vegetation and ground level. Its browsing adaptations indicate Paleotherium may have had a preference for wooded or at least semi-wooded habitats. As climatic conditions cooled and dried at the onset of the Oligocene, immigrant taxa from Asia dispersed into Europe, including Anthracotheres and Entelodonts. These groups may have been better adapted to the changed climatic conditions and rapidly replaced most of the components of the late Eocene faunus. Orohippus is believed to have evolved from equids such as Eohippus, as the earliest evidence for Orohippus appears about 2 million years after the first appearance of Eohippus. The anatomical differences between the two are slight. They were the same size, but Orohippus had a slimmer body, a more elongated head, slimmer forelimbs and longer hind legs, all of which are characteristics of a good jumper. Its teeth were brachydont in height, but the development of flattened surfaces and shearing lofts on their molars suggests they were more a browser than a frugivore. Eohippus is a classic prehistoric mammal, dubbed as one of the earliest and smallest horses ever to live. It was tiny, and most individuals seem to have averaged a size of about 30 centimeters high at the shoulder. Most early horses seem to have fed as browsers, selectively feeding upon low-growing plants. Such an environment and small size would have meant that Eohippus could hide amongst the undergrowth to try and avoid the eyes of hungry predators such as creodonts and early nimravids. Mesohippus had longer legs than its predecessor and stood about 60 centimeters tall. This equid is the first fully tridactyl horse in the evolutionary record, with the third digit being longer and larger than its second and fourth digits. It had not developed a hoof at this point, rather it still had pads as seen in Hyracotherium. Unlike earlier horses, its teeth were low-crowned and contained a single gap behind the front teeth, where the bit now rests in the modern horse. In addition, it had another grinding tooth, making a total of 6. Mesohippus was a browser that fed on tender twigs and fruit. The cerebral hemisphere, or cranial cavity, was notably larger than that of its predecessors. Its brain was similar to that of modern horses. Anchitherium was a browsing horse that originated in the early Miocene of North America and subsequently dispersed to Europe and Asia, where it gave rise to the larger-bodied genus Cynohippus. It was around 60 centimeters high at the shoulder, and probably represented a side branch of horse evolution that left no modern descendants. Merychippus. It was about 90 centimeters tall, and at the time it was the tallest equine to have existed. It lived in groups. Its muzzle was longer, deeper jaw and eyes wider apart than any other horse-like animal to date. The brain was also much larger, making it smarter and more agile. Merychippus was the first equine to have the distinctive head shape of today's horses. The Miocene was a time of drastic change in environment, with woodlands transforming into grass plains. This led to evolutionary changes in the hooves and teeth of equids. A change in surface from soft, uneven mud to hard grasslands meant there was less need for increased surface area. The foot was fully supported by ligaments, and the middle toe developed into a hoof that did not have a pad on the bottom. The transformation into plains meant Merychippus began consuming more phytolith-rich plants. This led to the presence of hypsodont teeth. Such teeth range from medium to intense crown height, are curved, covered in large amounts of cement, and are characteristic of grazing animals. Hipparion was one of the earlier grazing horses that was similar to Merychippus in form. Like other, advanced, horses of the Miocene, Hipparion supported its body weight upon a single toe that ended with a hoof. Other toes were also still present upon either side of this toe, but they had become so reduced in size that they did not even touch the ground. Despite its success after the Miocene, Hipparion was living in a world that saw the emergence of more advanced horses, all the way up to the point where the modern forms began to appear. These new forms as well as other new grazing animals such as mammoths would have meant increased competition for the same resources that Hipparion used. There is of course the consideration of the emergence of new predators such as cave hyena, which seems to have actively hunted horse by the greater numbers of horse remains compared to other animals found in association with them. All of these new animals appearing would have gradually edged Hipparion into extinction long before the near-total disappearance of the megafauna at the end of the Pleistocene. Hippidion from the Pleistocene of South America had especially long and domed nasal bones. This must have supported an enormous nasal area, possibly giving it a Saiga-like air conditioning system, a highly sensitive sense of smell, or perhaps even some sort of prehensile proboscis-like snout. It stood approximately 1.4 meters high at the shoulders and resembled a donkey. It is estimated to have died out at some point around the last 10,000 years, a time that saw much of the other South American megafauna disappear. This disappearance coincides with the arrival of the first people in South America, and hunting may have been a significant factor in the decline of the South American megafauna at this time, although perhaps not the single root cause of this mass extinction. Pliohippus, from the Middle Miocene of North America, and several of its other close relatives had especially large, deep recesses in their skulls, usually referred to as preorbital fossae. And the purpose of these holes is still unknown. Although superficially similar depressions are seen in various other perissodactyl groups, they vary in position and structure and probably weren't all homologous. Ideas have included resonating chambers, some sort of glands, inflatable sacs, or attachment sites for complex lip musculature. Like the modern horse, Pliohippus was a grazer that fed on steppe grasses of the North American plains it inhabited. Tens of thousands of years ago, a huge horse species walked, trotted, and galloped across the shifting sands of what is today South Africa's Cape South coast. The giant Cape zebra weighed an estimated 500 kilograms. Its extant relatives in southern Africa are far smaller. The plains zebra weighs between 250 and 300 kilograms. It became extinct just over 10,000 years ago. This may have been partly because of the loss of its preferred habitat of extensive grasslands, as rising sea levels flooded the vast Paleogallus plain. But until now it hasn't been clear how common the species was on the Cape South coast, because its body fossils are predominantly from southern Africa's west coast. Grevy's zebra is the largest living wild equid and the most threatened of the three species of zebra. Named after Jules Grevy, it is found in parts of Kenya and Ethiopia. Superficially, Grevy's zebra's physical features can help to identify it from the other zebra species. Their overall appearance is slightly closer to that of a mule, compared to the more equine appearance of the plains zebras. They live in semi-arid savanna, where they feed on grasses, legumes and browse. They can survive up to 5 days without water. They differ from the other zebra species in that they do not live in a harem, and they maintain few long-lasting social bonds. Despite a handful of zoos and animal parks around the world having had successful captive breeding programs, in its native home this zebra is listed as endangered. Its population has declined from 15,000 to 2,000 since the 70s. The plains zebra is the most common and geographically widespread species of zebra. Its range is fragmented, but spans much of southern and eastern Africa south of the Sahara. 6 or 7 subspecies have been recognized, including the extinct quagga, which was thought to be a separate species. Great variation in coat patterns exists between clines and individuals. The plains zebra's habitat is generally, but not exclusively, treeless grasslands and savanna woodlands, both tropical and temperate. They generally avoid desert, dense rainforest and permanent wetlands. They are a highly social species, forming harems with a single stallion, several mares and their recent offspring. Bachelor groups also form. Groups may come together to form herds. The animals keep watch for predators. They bark or snort when they see a predator, and the harem stallion attacks predators to defend his harem. Like all zebras, they are boldly striped in black and white, and no two individuals look exactly alike. Compared to other species, the plains zebra has broader stripes. The stripes are vertical on the forepart of the body, and tend towards the horizontal on the hindquarters. Northern zebra populations have narrower and more defined striping. Southern populations have varied but lesser amounts of striping on the underparts, the legs and the hindquarters. Southern populations also have brown shadow stripes between the black and white coloring. A newborn is capable of standing almost immediately and starts to eat grass within a week. Early on, a mother zebra keeps any other zebra away from her foal. Mortality for foals is high in their first year of life and is usually caused by predation. The quagga is believed to have been around 130 centimeters tall at the shoulder. It was distinguished from other zebras by its limited pattern of primarily brown and white stripes, mainly on the front part of the body. The rear was brown and without stripes, and appeared more horse-like. Little is known about the quagga's behavior, but it may have gathered into herds of 30 to 50. Quaggas were said to be wild and lively, yet were also considered more docile than the related Burchell zebra. After the European settlement of South Africa began, the quagga was extensively hunted, as it competed with domesticated animals for forage. Some were taken to zoos in Europe, but breeding programs were unsuccessful. The last wild population lived in the Orange Free State. The quagga was extinct in the wild by 1878. The last captive specimen died in Amsterdam on August 12, 1883. Like all equids, kiangs are herbivores, feeding on grasses and sedges. When little grass is available, such as during winter or in the more arid margins of their native habitat, they have been observed eating shrubs, herbs and even Oxytropis roots, dug from the ground. Although they do sometimes drink from waterholes, such sources of water are rare on the Tibetan Plateau, and they likely obtain most of their water from the plants they eat, or possibly from snow in winter. Their only real predator other than humans is the Himalayan wolf. Kiangs defend themselves by forming a circle, and with heads down, kick out violently. As a result, wolves usually attack single animals that have strayed from the group. Kiangs sometimes gather together in large herds, which may number several hundred individuals. They inhabit alpine meadows and steppe country between 2,700 and 5,300 meters elevation. They prefer relatively flat plateaus and low hills, dominated by grasses and smaller amounts of other low-lying vegetation. This open terrain, in addition to supplying them with suitable forage absent in the more arid regions of Central Asia, may make it easier for them to detect and flee from predators. The onager, also known as hemione, is a species of the family Equidae native to Asia. Unlike most horses and donkeys, they have never been domesticated. They are among the fastest mammals, as they can run as fast as 70 kilometers per hour. The onager is closely related to the African wild ass, as they both shared the same ancestor. Other than deserts, it lives in plains, steppes and savannas. Like many other large grazing animals, the onager's range has contracted greatly under the pressures of poaching and habitat loss. Previously listed as endangered, the onager has been classified as near threatened in 2015. The extreme isolation of many subpopulations also threatens the species, as genetic problems can result from inbreeding. Overgrazing by livestock reduces food availability, and herders also reduce the availability of water at springs. The cutting down of nutritious shrubs and bushes exacerbates the problem. The African wild ass is primarily active in the cooler hours between late afternoon and early morning, seeking shade and shelter amongst the rocky hills during the day. On the flat, it has been recorded reaching speeds of 70 km per hour. In keeping with these feats, its soles are particularly hard and its hooves grow very quickly. Unlike most hoofed mammals, their tendency is to not flee right away from a potentially dangerous situation, but to investigate first before deciding what to do. When they need to, they can defend themselves with kicks from both their front and hind legs. Though the species itself is under no threat of extinction, due to abundant domestic stock, the two extant wild subspecies are both listed as critically endangered. They have been captured for domestication for centuries, and this, along with interbreeding between wild and domestic animals, has caused a distinct decline in population numbers. There are now only a few hundred individuals left in the wild. The giant horse is an extinct species of horse which lived in North America starting in the Blancan, and died out about 12,000 years ago near the end of the Pleistocene, around the same time as most of the other megafauna of the Americas. It is the largest known species of fossil horse. Standing up to 2 meters tall at the shoulder and weighing 1,200 to 1,500 kilograms, this species was as large as or larger than most draft horses. Both family and bachelor herds of Yukon wild horses were non-selective grazers that foraged mostly in a savanna-like regions. These horses fed mostly on grasses, sedges, mustards and other flowers. Their preferred environment is believed to have been a woodland with sparse clumps of trees. Overall, it is considered to have been resistant to varying climatic conditions, although most individuals of this species seem to have died in the winter season. It is also likely that the Yukon wild horse was susceptible to wolf predation. Przewalski's horse is a rare and endangered horse originally native to the steppes of Central Asia. It is named after the Russian geographer and explorer Nikolai Przewalski. Once extinct in the wild, it has been reintroduced to its native habitat since the 90s in Mongolia. Several genetic characteristics of Przewalski's horse differ from what is seen in modern domestic horses, indicating neither is an ancestor of the other. For example, the Przewalski has 33 chromosome pairs, compared to 32 for the domestic horse. Their ancestral lineages split from a common ancestor between 38,000 and 160,000 years ago, long before the domestication of the horse. It was long considered the only remaining truly wild horse, in contrast with the American Mustang or the Australian Brumby, which are instead feral horses descended from domesticated animals. Horses maintain visual contact with their family and herd at all times, and have a host of ways to communicate with one another, including vocalizations, scent marking and a wide range of visual and tactile signals. Each kick, groom, tilt of the ear or other contact with another horse is a means of communicating. This constant communication leads to complex social behaviors among Przewalski's horses.